I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. One of the challenges facing genetic medicines is delivering payloads across the human cell membrane and inside cells both effectively and with high tolerability. Aegis Life is capitalizing on its parent Entos Pharmaceuticals nucleic acid delivery platform technology to address infectious diseases. It recently secured investment from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to help in the fight against malaria, HIV, and other conditions. We spoke to John Lewis, founder and CEO of Aegis Life, about the need it's addressing, the company's platform technology, and how it's leveraging that to address the barriers to the delivery of vaccines and antibody therapies in developing economies. John, thanks for joining us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
We're going to talk about infectious diseases, Aegis Life, and its efforts to develop DNA-encoded antibody therapies and vaccines to treat them. Well, let's start with the need. You're developing vaccines and therapeutics for infectious diseases. These are diseases where the burdens can often be greater in low and middle income countries. What's the need for treatments for these conditions, and has the economics of the markets where the needs may be the most acute slowed the application of innovative technologies to address them?
Yeah, I mean, this is a serious issue worldwide. So just to give you an example, the burden of communicable diseases is about 10 times higher in low and middle income countries in terms of mortality rate and years of life lost. So that's pretty significant. Many of these countries are in tropical or subtropical areas, and they often have limited access to improved water supply, sanitation, or healthcare coverage. And so, I mean, thinking about which diseases we're thinking about, so lower respiratory infections, pneumonia, malaria, HIV/AIDS, and even, pretty preventable diseases like measles are among the leading causes of deaths and illnesses in children under 5 living in these countries. Every year, malaria, HIV, tuberculosis kill over 2.8 million people. And obviously this burden is felt disproportionately by less wealthy countries. I mean, I think if you look at the sort of the situation, I think, and we've seen, from the recent pandemic, infectious diseases are not constrained by borders. And in this globalized world, disease outbreak in one corner of the world can rapidly become a global threat. So I think it's really important to work collaboratively to develop and deploy safe and effective, interventions that can obviously protect lives everywhere.
You mentioned the recent pandemic. We did see a rush of activity to develop new vaccines and therapies. Has that helped change the long-term interest among biopharma and the investment community in addressing infectious diseases?
Yeah, I think as an optimist, I certainly would hope so. I mean, as an industry, the pandemic taught us a lot about the, inequities, for instance, in the public health response in low and middle income countries, for instance. At Aegis, we're really passionate about developing vaccines and therapeutics that sort of not only prevent future pandemics, but can be manufactured at scale, cost effectively, making them more accessible. For people even living in North America in rural, remote communities, but certainly from low and middle income countries. Given the urgency of the situation in the pandemic, which I think was remarkable, we thankfully saw, a lot of investment, rapid acceleration and approval of vaccines, particularly the genetic vaccines, the RNA vaccines. And so, the sort of follow-on effect from this is this really opened up a new industry of being able to rapidly develop things like vaccines and therapeutics for infectious disease, but also many other diseases as well.
We talked about the problems of economics, but there's also an infrastructure issue. Delivering an effective therapy to patients who need it can be complicated by the need to refrigerate and transportation issues. How much of a mismatch is there between available therapies and where they're needed?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So, I mean, and then again, I'll look at the pandemic. The recent experience, with the pandemic, sadly exemplifies how infrastructure is critical or lack thereof, and this significantly contributes to health inequities, both rural and urban, but also in around the globe. For instance, we know that the RNA vaccines were pretty highly effective, but initially required, this cold chain logistics that just didn't exist in most places, minus 80 Celsius freezing, and then later minus 20. But still, that infrastructure and the lack thereof created pretty serious barriers to who could gain access to it, and particularly rapidly. And so this clearly is a challenge to resource constrained countries, but also, as I mentioned, in rural areas of countries, even North America. And so, if we want an effective public health response to an emerging infectious disease, we require broad and rapid deployment of effective vaccines and therapies. So, I mean, this is why we're the platform we're developing for vaccines and for therapies. A really important component of that is regular fridge stability. So most clinics around the world have the ability to store flu vaccines, for instance, in a regular refrigerator, and so we've really try to design what we're doing to be compatible with that already existing infrastructure.
Let's talk about what you're doing. Aegis is developing what it calls DNA encoded antibodies. In essence, you're harnessing the cell's machinery to produce a desired protein to either vaccinate or treat a patient. Can you explain the case for DNA encoded antibodies? What benefits do they provide?
In the human body, our immune system produces antibodies to be able to specifically recognize, but more importantly, clear foreign pathogens, foreign invaders. And so it's a very important tool in our immune system to be able to recognize and clear disease, as quickly as possible. So there are different kinds of antibodies, but there's this specific kind of antibody that we call neutralizing antibody that not only sticks to the foreign pathogen, but basically takes it out, prevents it from infecting. And so what we found in the pandemic, we've done it before, but what we really found was effective in the pandemic was that certain individuals who are infected with COVID-19, for instance, produced antibodies, and some people produced better antibodies than others. So companies like Regeneron, Eli Lilly, AbCellera were able to take these very effective neutralizing antibodies from patients and manufacture them at scale. And then for individuals who are, starting to come down with COVID-19, there was a pretty big risk that they would develop severe disease. They would get infusions of these antibodies sort of to replace their own response and provide a more rapid response, which would clear the infection. And so this is a fantastic tool to be able to really decrease the severity of these infectious diseases, but it's expensive. Like, it's expensive to manufacture these antibodies, to store them, to infuse them in patients, and so viable in first world countries, but not really viable elsewhere. So what we proposed and what we're doing now is developing a platform whereby we're actually encoding these DNA antibodies, these antibodies in DNA, so that when we inject them into the body, your body can actually make them internally and circulate them around. And by doing this, we create a much more scalable manufacturing process and a much more straightforward cold chain. So they can be stored in the regular fridge, and they're just as effective, ideally, as the infused antibodies.
Aegis is a spin out of Entos Pharmaceuticals. It's using Entos's platform technology, Fusogenics PLV. What is Fusogenics PLV and what does it do? How does it work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So PLV stands for proteolipid vehicle, which is a technical, complicated name. I recognize that. So obviously we became familiar in the pandemic with LNP, or lipid nanoparticles. And the lipid nanoparticles sort of were the formulation that delivered the RNA vaccines into our muscles to provide immunity against COVID-19. And so we have I would say we have a second generation lipid nanoparticle system. The PLV actually delivers either DNA or RNA into the body through a really interesting direct fusion event. And so in my academic life, we've been studying these fusion proteins for a couple of decades, and in 2016, we launched Entos Pharmaceuticals as a platform technology company because we recognized that this platform could be used for a wide variety of different applications. One of those is vaccines and infectious disease, but also for cancer, also for rare disease, gene therapy, gene editing, and so that company has been working in all these different areas. When the pandemic started, though, we recognized obviously a specific need to go after infectious disease, and we thought this platform would be ideal to create, a single shot, fridge stable, long durability COVID-19 vaccine that was suitable for cold chain around the world. So we launched Aegis Life, and so we've been working with Aegis since then to develop both vaccines and DNA therapeutics.
What does one of these therapies typically consist of?
Yeah, so again, it's a lipid particle. It has a fusion protein in it, with the proteome part, and basically we use that to deliver either a DNA, so basically the blueprint for creating therapeutic proteins in your body, or RNA, which is slightly different, and we're in the vaccines, for instance, and can be used to make any protein in the body as well. But the different use case here is that the DNA is very stable. So DNA you can actually extract from dinosaur bones intact, and so that stability allows us to store it in the fridge rather than freezing it. And so there are specific use cases where DNA works a lot better. The expression of these therapeutic neutralizing antibodies against HIV and malaria, for instance, DNA is the perfect way to do it, and so that's what we're using for that.
Are there any challenges in terms of delivering these therapies and vaccines to particular cells within the body?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the key questions we're trying to answer in our current development process. So obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic taught us that we, the proverbial we, have the ability to generate and gain approval for genetic medicines very quickly. Again, we understand. We've sequenced the human genome. We understand the genetic underpinnings of many diseases. We can, we sequence the SARS-CoV-2 very quickly, and so it's a very rapid process to be able to develop genetic medicines, with RNA or DNA, to be able to counteract these. But there certainly are challenges. So, where the vaccine goes in the body after you inject it is an important question, and something that definitely needs to be addressed to really preserve a high bar of safety. And delivery itself. So LNP, lipid nanoparticles, do a great job of delivering RNA, but the delivery of DNA is a little more complicated. And so that's the main reason why we developed this Fusogenix PLV platform, because we're equally able to deliver RNA or DNA effectively. And DNA in particular it is more challenging to deliver. But I would say because of its other benefits, I think in many cases we'll be able to produce, more scalable, more cost-effective, safer medicines with DNA.
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation recently invested $4.5 million in Aegis to help in the fight against malaria, HIV, and other infectious diseases. This comes on top of an earlier grant the organization made to the company. How is the funding being used?
Yeah, so this goes back to my earlier comment about these highly effective neutralizing antibodies that we used in COVID, but they've also been discovered that can be used to block the transmission of malaria, HIV, and probably many other diseases as well. And we have a viable commercial way of giving them therapeutically now by manufacturing those antibodies and fusing them. But this is a very expensive process, and each treatment is quite expensive and really not suited to deployment around the world, particularly in low and middle income countries. So the Gates Foundation, recognizing this, saw a need to create a genetic medicine whereby the patient or the individual would basically become a factory to make these neutralizing antibodies internally. And so we've been having conversations for several years, and our technology is really ideally suited to encode these very effective, very safe neutralizing antibodies, create a medicine that can be injected just in the arm, and so that your body can produce this sort of curative and protective therapy. And so we've been working since the middle of last year on developing this platform so that it's suitable for use in people. We want to obviously make sure that we make it the most potent as possible, so we can give very small doses. That we work on the specific neutralizing antibodies themselves to make sure we choose the best one and produce the best product, so that it's not only safe and effective, but also scalable, easy to produce, and suitable for deployment, in places around the world.
Is it unusual to see the Gates Foundation make an investment in the form of a convertible promissory note rather than just doing this as a straight grant? And what does that mean long term?
Yeah, so I think this is something that the Gates Foundation has been doing for a little while. It's not super uncommon, but it's becoming more common. So the Gates Foundation has a strategic investment fund, and basically its mandate is to invest in promissory notes and other mechanisms into companies that have technologies that can really make an impact around the world. And this route is really intended to stimulate sort of the private sector driven innovation, encourage market driven efficiencies, and really attract external capital to priority initiatives. So we believe, based on sort of this investment by the Gates Foundation, it'll also attract other investment into the company, and so this is the route we took.
Well, let's talk about malaria and HIV. What's the global need to address these conditions today?
Yeah, so obviously it's a pretty huge global need. A recent study by the WHO found that global immunization efforts have saved an estimated 154 million lives. Yeah, it's crazy. So the equivalent of 6 lives every minute of every year for the past 50 years. So, this study showed that immunization is the single greatest contribution of any health intervention to ensuring babies not only see their first birthdays, but continue leading healthy lives into adulthood. At the end of 2022, about 39 million people globally were living with HIV. 9.2 million of those people didn't have access to antiretroviral treatment, for instance. Malaria, there were about 249 million cases of malaria in 2022, with over 600,000 deaths. So, the African region carries a disproportionately high share of these cases, being home to about 94% of all malaria cases. And the real devastating part of this is that children under 5 accounted for 78% of malaria deaths in the region. So, I mean, this is pretty much unacceptable, I would say, in a world where we have the technologies to combat them. So, and infectious diseases continue to threaten these low and middle income countries' economic progress, institutional strength, and the survival, obviously, of family units. So, and of course, bring it home, because of the nature of infectious diseases and their ability to travel far and fast. Everyone worldwide sort of remains vulnerable when it comes to public threats like this.
And how challenging is it to develop a vaccine for these conditions?
Yeah, so I would say, in a world now where we have the rapid ability to be able to do sequencing, so we can understand sort of the components of a new infectious disease very quickly, potentially on the order of days. And then we have these platform technologies like the Fusogenics PLV system or the lipid nanoparticle system to be able to very rapidly generate a countermeasure, either through a vaccine or therapeutic. I think that, at least conceptually, we have the opportunity here to be able to both react quickly to and to counteract infectious disease very quickly. And I'll say a key difference then between, vaccines are a great approach. They've had a tremendous impact, but there's a certain proportion of the population that doesn't respond to vaccines at all. So people who are immunocompromised, the more elderly, often don't produce any immune response or have any effect from a vaccine. And I think this is really where these neutralizing antibody technologies, DNA encoded, for instance, can play a huge role even in North America. Because, sort of our most vulnerable to these infectious diseases, as we saw certainly during the pandemic, are the ones that need the most protection. And this particular DNA-coded antibody is, would be an effective way to be able to stop that.
And how cost conscious do you have to be in designing treatments for these markets? And how cost effective might Aegis technology be?
Yeah, so this is really essentially why we're undertaking this project, cost effectiveness. We have the knowledge now. We understand how to create a therapy that will block transmission. We understand very well the science behind it, and if we infuse these antibodies directly, we see a dramatic effect. Again, they're just very expensive. So the concept of obviously the concept of being able to have your body do all the work, make that treatment yourself is very compelling, because then all you need to do is deliver this very inexpensive blueprint for the cure that the body makes itself. So the key, I guess, technology barrier to that is having the delivery technology to be able to deliver that blueprint in and make the therapeutic protein. So our platform, again, during the pandemic, we developed a COVID-19 directed DNA vaccine that we took into clinical trials. And the reason we did that is for that exact reason. It's very, very cost effective. We could potentially make each dose for less than $5, and if we scale up enough, less than $1.
Well, where are you in terms of development efforts for either of those conditions?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, we right from scratch built a brand new DNA-based COVID-19 vaccine, which we tested first in a phase 1 clinical trial in Canada. And then for phase 2, we actually went over to Africa and tested in Burkina Faso. And that vaccine program is still under development. We're starting a trial for a booster variant of it, a state-of-the-art booster variant in the coming month, actually. For the DNA-encoded vaccines, the Gates Foundation investment will basically fund a 2-year development project. And so the goals for that project are to bring a DNA-encoded neutralizing antibody to clinic after 2 years.
One thing we've learned from the COVID pandemic is the need to be able to mount a rapid response to an outbreak. How well suited is your technology for not only rapid development, but for scaling production?
Yeah, so this is essentially why we're so excited about this project. Genetic medicine approaches in general, at least conceptually, have the ability to very rapidly respond to infectious diseases as they emerge, and so our platform is ideally suited for that. We can either make RNA-based or DNA-based medicines. Either one of these can be very rapidly produced. Once we've figured out what the pathogen is, and so both Entos and Aegis have established a sort of clinical manufacturing facility, so we can very rapidly, on the order of weeks, identify a pathogen, sequence it, create a vaccine or a therapeutic, and scale that up for clinical use.
Given the broad applicability of your technology, how are you prioritizing indications you'll pursue?
So it really comes down to unmet need. So we're, given the economics of scalability of the platform, we're looking to, diseases that the world could do well without. And again, this is a kind of it's a platform technology that can be applied to very rare diseases and to very prevalent diseases equally. And so we're targeting indications where there's a clear unmet need, validated targets for therapeutic development that can easily be addressed using our Fusogenics PLV-based therapies and vaccines. We're incredibly grateful for the Gates Foundation support and making it viable for us to go after HIV and malaria. They brought some just really incredible technologies to the table. And again, as I mentioned, these validated targets that we understand very well, that we know if we can sort of hit our goals with development, we're going to be able to block the trend, the infection of these diseases. It makes it very exciting for our team.
John Lewis, founder and CEO of Aegis Life. John, thanks so much for your time today.
Real pleasure, Danny. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.